because he called me and he wants.
Lead the way.
Morning, Brian. Good.
What's this? What are we doing?
Sidewalk Cafes, we're gonna start. You head down on Port Avenue.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I'm on the call. You probably know that, but I'll be there. I'll be there in about 10 minutes.
Tell me loud and clear.
You're going to be PDH'd for being late.
I don't know what that means, but
Thanks, Chris. Well, let's go ahead and start our workshop for Monday, December 17th. And first up will be Sidewalk Cafes.
Mr. Mayor, Pro Tem Council members, you'll recall you had a discussion several months ago about some establishments down on 3rd Street and the way they interacted with the sidewalk and the cafe. You had referred it back to us to look for a policy that could be applied universally, and staff has done a great job of looking at that. Candy's going to kick things off.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. I'm Candy Reinhold, Assistant to the City Manager. And before we launch into the presentation itself, I would like to ask Major Waymeyer to come up and provide an update on the Court Avenue area. First thing that we're going to do is show a couple of videos. This is the one that was taken, it's a little dark. This is one that was taken last July, July of 2011. It's a little dark and there's no sound, but it'll give you the gist of it. This was when the Sidewalk Cafe was in place in front of what is now known as the Standard. Anyway, that'll give you an idea. It never works where you want it to. Diane, you want to look for this one?
No, you didn't select. Try and open it. You didn't select. You didn't select file.
This one?
Just open it up. Open it up and then shut it. Lead it through right.
How about the one that's in the middle of the screen?
Go to my computer and select UPS.
You didn't select.
There. Sorry, thank you. So this is a video after the cafe has been taken out. You can still see that there are few people still walking in the street. However, you can see that there are more people on the sidewalk, able to walk on the sidewalk, than if there was a cafe on there. So with that, I'm going to have Major Waymire provide a little bit of an update.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good morning. Steve Waymire, Des Moines Police Department. When we brought this to council in July, we talked about coming back, revisiting the issue 6 months later. That's why we're here this morning. I had video taken by the officers working. I had them do it on Halloween night, or the party for Halloween, as you can see some of the costumes. But that was the busiest night we had since summer. So I wanted to have something comparable with crowd size. What you see in this new video is the ability to walk on the sidewalks. Occasionally the lines get backed up and people still walk around them, but without the sidewalk cafes, it allows the officers working downtown to manage the crowd. They can go up and slide people down, and there's space for them on the sidewalks. We'll never get partiers completely off the street, but at least now they have a place to go. We believe this to be, that sidewalk still to be too small for a sidewalk cafe. One of the officers even commented that that's downtown on a daily basis, that the ability for motorized wheelchairs is there, where when the sidewalk cafe is there, sometimes they're forced to go around and out into the street. I have not seen that personally, but that was the comment that came back when I asked for comments from our downtown police officers. With that, do you have any questions on what we've done here before Candy gets into her presentation?
Can you just answer, the people that are on the sidewalk, are those primarily smokers?
That looks like the line to get in.
Okay.
And some of them are smokers as well, but for the most part, that's the line to get in. And then that forces people to walk around them.
Okay. I know. Back out. Wrong place.
Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sue Donovan, who will give the presentation. Sue Donovan, Neighborhood Inspection Zoning Administrator for the city. Briefly, after August 13th of 2012, we had 2 roll calls come to council, as you recall. One on the standard, which was to renew the lease agreement, and the other was to create a lease space and a lease agreement for the Komodo Club right next to the standard on this sidewalk. Council delayed, or actually declined to do that, and had us come back and review the policies and procedures. And so staff took quite a bit of time working on this. What we've come up with is there are certain actions that we feel with the sidewalk cafes that need to stay with council, which would be the original request to vacate and lease a space for council to determine whether that should happen. Then the original lease agreement, when the vacation and the lease came to council, would be heard at the same time. Leases that lapse for a year could be reviewed by council after that year to see if council still wanted to have that lease agreement in place. And then, should it occur that staff believes that that leased space should be returned to public purpose, that would come back to council for review. We had some questions and concerns among staff and the community on our terminology. We used to have lease and license, and they were so close together in sound and definition that it was difficult for us to discuss it. So we decided that lease should be the use of the area that sells alcohol or has a permanent enclosure, and a permitted space would be for temporary daily use of an area with no alcohol service. There are a few of those around the city, Sesame. There's a couple others where Mars Cafe, where they take the tables and chairs in at the end of the day, and there can be no alcohol sales. So that would be a permit. Some internal process changes
just to clarify administration of the lease and permits, move some of the duties from the city manager to community development, which is really where the bulk of the work is done right now, with the authority to approve, administer, and terminate leases and permits. And then the city manager and council, of course, determines if the lease permit site should be required for public purpose. It's just more of a clarification of duties. This is sort of the bulk of probably the changes, the meat of the thing. As you recall, on 3rd Street, we had a leased area that sort of cut around a light pole, which then created not a clear space to walk down. What we would do is the requirements would require a clear space, not cut around an obstruction. We believe, staff, that a lease area should provide for service of customers at a table, similar to Dos Rios, Spaghetti Works, some of the others on Court Avenue, where people are actually sitting at a table. They get served. There's enough room for all of that, rather than just a standing-only leased area where we feel it causes that congestion across the top of the lease where people are standing around talking. That would also, then the occupancy could not exceed the number of seats required for seating, and then the area surrounding the seats for service. And then we also think the operator should be discouraging patrons from interrupting pedestrian traffic on the adjoining sidewalk by their operation. What we'd like to do is have appeals go to the hearing officer if there is a denial of an existing lease or revocation or suspension for violation of the lease agreement, the terms of the lease, where staff feels that they're not operating to the terms of the lease, rather than having all of those come back to council. And that would be under the Chapter 3 that we just initiated to do some of these administrative hearings. So the next steps would be, with council's blessing, make the amendments to the ordinance as outlined, and make changes to the agreements to clarify the process. Questions, concerns?
Susan, a couple of questions. Have you had a chance to sit down with the operators of the standard?
Not yet. We're going to do that next.
Okay, so did any of the operators of Court Avenue establishments have input, or were they involved in the process?
Just in our basic meetings that you attended earlier on regarding overall.
And then the other two questions, there were questions raised about the space. It would be to the west, off of the alley, that would be available.
We are looking into the alleyway between the standard and the Komodo. There seems to be an opportunity there. It would push the dumpsters further back, and then maybe have some sort of a shared patio space. There's like 16 feet, so they could each have 8.
Okay. And so what's the status of that? When will
We're still ongoing to look at that, yeah. That would be initiated probably in January, see if we can't do that before spring.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the last question goes back to the smoking question. From what I understand, that's an issue throughout Court Avenue, especially when you've got bars and, a lot of establishments close together, and that's adding to the congregation on the sidewalks. I see Glenn here. Maybe he can address that at some point, but is that part of the discussion that's going on?
There are issues due to the state law that you can't smoke inside that pushes patrons out. We try to accommodate as much as we can to keep people off sidewalks through some other use of space for smoking.
Okay.
This 3rd Street, it is sort of, it has its own constraints, which creates some of the need to be more creative.
Yeah,
with
3rd
where to
Street
put
would be
people.
the most challenging.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other areas of the city this would affect? Do we have a sidewalk cafe out in the Beaverdale area?
We do.
Yep.
And it would not affect them. We've done an analysis of all the existing sidewalk cafes. This new policy would not affect any existing.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Two questions. On the Beaverdale issue and along Ingersoll and anywhere else where we might do streetscape, it would probably be wise that we recognize this new ordinance if it's approved, before we do design on that? Because right now out in Beaverdale, you might not have problems, but if we put a similar constructed box like we have on Ingersoll, it probably wouldn't be in compliance anymore. So I'd just like to make sure we're conscious of that. The second question, or the second comment is a question, and that is, do we anticipate other current users coming back and asking for a wider patio because now the ordinance might allow for them to have a wider patio than they've had in the past?
Councilman, this is Sue Ann Donovan, and I don't anticipate that.
Okay.
All right, anybody else have anything else? Sue Ann, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, just, Sue Ann, before you sit down, the next step in the process,
The next step would be to make the ordinance changes and bring them to you in January.
you'll be meeting with some of the businesses
And we'll
in
meet
the
with,
area
yes,
prior to-
and let the standard and the Komodo know that this will be presented to.
Will you do it in conjunction with the Court Avenue Business
Certainly.
Association? Okay. I think that's important.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Manager? All right. Let's move on to the sustainability update with Laura Graham.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. Laura Graham, Assistant to the City Manager. Today we're going to walk through a couple of suggestions. Over the course of the last year, Council directed the City Manager to take a look at a number of goals and achievements to accomplish over the course of the last year. So we'll go ahead and review those. Some of the other ideas that we wanted to put forth are some of the initiatives that we partner with across the community and other things our staff are doing. And then finally, just a quick list of some of the future plans that staff's looking at in order to move sustainability forward within our own departments. So the first item here is to take a look at green infrastructure training, and the goal out of this initiative was to institutionalize a city green infrastructure program by providing training opportunities. To date, we've had 10 people, which is 2 council members and 8 staff people, attend the green infrastructure training that's provided by the Conservation Fund in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. In late June, we haven't set the date yet, but we are working with the Conservation Fund to bring them here and hold a week-long training and design charrette right here in Des Moines to take a look at some best practices for watershed areas. This also gives us the opportunity to partner with other cities and train with a total of up to 60 people. In addition to those 2 trainings, we're also implementing staff attending several low or no cost green infrastructure trainings that are located generally right here in Des Moines, but there's also some across the state. One was just held by the DNR last week, and we had members attend that training as well. And then finally, last week, we had a presentation put together. The EPA was here to announce the Greening America's Capitals, partnering with city staff to look at our 6th Avenue streetscape. One of the other goals that was put forth last year was to continue our participation in the STAR Communities Index program with our existing staff and resources. STAR was implemented back in 2010, and we were one of 10 beta communities. And these communities are all across the United States and in a various array of points in time within their own sustainability plans. STAR Pilot launched this past November, and what we found is that we went from 10 in the beta phase to 30 communities across the nation, and then also 1 in Canada that have registered to be a part of this. So this is a big movement. There is 1 other community here in Iowa that's participating, which is the city of Davenport. Training was held last week. We had several staff members and actually members of the Greater Des Moines Partnership attend that training, and really STAR is going to be rolling out over the course of the next several months between now and July, different templates to really get this kicked off. So we've been gearing up for the last 18 months on this program. The exciting point now is that the tools are going to be available in January, and we'll be able to pursue this in earnest. Staff itself, we've spent over 100 hours reviewing these goals and objectives and the feasibility of the program for Des Moines. This is a big step forward for the city because this is the first time we've recognized a comprehensive framework for sustainability. And it's not just going to be led by the city of Des Moines, but we're really going to have to start partnering with other organizations across our corporate boundaries to really push this agenda forward. The other piece I think it's important to note is we've spent hundreds of hours reviewing this, but this is really going to be resource intensive from staff, beginning in January with the self-assessment tool, and as the climate and energy goal are rolled out online. So that's an important thing for you to understand and hear. To give you a little bit of an idea of what this framework looks like, they have this lined up, STAR has this lined up between 3- and 5-star communities in terms of points. We are currently a participating STAR community, which gives us no points, but as we start to roll out the assessment tool and as we start to pursue these different goals and objectives, staff is thinking that likely will fall in that 3-star community area, recognized for sustainability leadership.
What if the council decides we'd rather have you be a 5-star community?
I think that that's absolutely possible. There's certainly a lot that needs to be done, but it wouldn't be accomplishable in the next 12 months. It's something that I think will take time, and STAR recognizes that, but it's definitely a goal area that we'd like to see. To give you an idea of what the framework for STAR looks like, here shows you the matrix of the 7 different goal areas, and I think there are 44 different objectives for each goal area. And what I like about this framework is it shows it's comprehensive. It touches things like green infrastructure. It addresses ideas like jobs and the economy, certainly climate and energy, but also education, arts, and the community, as well as health and safety. So it really has a breadth of understanding of what sustainability is. To show you what staff did a quick review, and certainly this isn't comprehensive, but these are areas that we feel we're doing quite a bit in now, which is sort of our low-hanging fruit that we'll be able to take a look at as these goals and objectives are rolled out across the next 6 months. Certainly not comprehensive, but Mayor, I think this kind of answers your question about kind of time and becoming a 5-star community in terms of the things that we'll have to do moving forward. The other goal, one of the other goals that we were asked to accomplish was to look at communications and marketing. So make more direct information available to the public by referencing city communications in the website. This summer, we started to implement the Green Tip in the City Source newsletter, and these are ideas that any individual who receives the newsletter should be able to do. So the recycling program is available to every homeowner across the city. And one of the things here that we're recognizing is the fact that if you bundle all of your plastic bottles that may be recyclable but into a plastic bag, and you put that plastic bag in the recycling bin, that actually ends up in the landfill and not in the recycling because they're not able to separate those out. So things like this these little tips will help homeowners maybe understand a little bit more about sustainability practices that are easily implementable in their home and is generally low to no cost. We've also seen continued promotion of various efficiency projects completed by the city in the City Source newsletter. So anytime there's an economic development project that's mentioned that has a sustainability component that's outlined, if we have any other city buildings that are coming online that are LEED rated as an example, those are generally incorporated into City Source. We also look at including these things in press releases, Facebook, and in other presentations that staff does throughout the community. We continue to look at branding and promoting sustainability efforts. And then, of course, we do have the Green Des Moines website, which is greendm.org. And what that allows us to do is keep everyone updated on some of the other efforts that are going on that we are unable to publish through other areas. Sustainability leads in departments. This is another area, a goal area that we were asked to address, and it's really just to establish in each department a sustainability programs lead. And that's been done in several departments: community development, engineering, public works, park and rec as an example. But we also have a sustainability team. One thing I didn't mention earlier is we also have a green infrastructure team. Those are individuals who were trained through that Conservation Fund training over the course of the last few years. And they meet on a semi-monthly basis, and the sustainability team meets on a monthly basis. And so these are the members of the sustainability team. And just last week, I had a request from police to be added, so that'll be moving forward. One of the next goal areas was to reduce energy use in city buildings and expand to fire and library facilities. Staff wants to have a 25% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2015, and that's representative of 15 of our city buildings. I think this is a pretty important number, that since 2008, we have actually reduced our energy consumption in these 15 buildings by 14%. In the next few months, staff will be working on an RFP to be drafted to provide an energy audit and plan for existing city facilities. And what that will allow us to do is to find other ways that we can reduce our CO2 emissions through energy efficiency improvements. And the next point here is that we operate 5 LEED buildings. There'll be a 6th one added in 2013 of our own buildings. And this is kind of interesting. From the research I've done across the city, we are the only organization across the city that has this many individual LEED rated buildings that are owned and operated by the same entity. So that's something to be proud of and something to definitely be recognized for. Here's kind of another interesting note. Since 2008, we've saved over $1.2 million for these energy efficiency improvements. Now, I want to make sure you understand this is separate from the improvements on our city facilities. These are purely from our LED traffic light relamping, our T1 relamping within our city buildings, and then our hybrid fleet vehicles. So you can see here that sort of sustained cost savings over the last several years. The LED traffic lamps, we have over 400 of those in our city, and those have all been switched over to this LED technology, so you see that savings there. The T1 relamping is within those 15 city buildings. And then finally, with the hybrid fleet vehicles, we have, I believe, 33 in our fleet currently that are utilized by the police department, our detectives, our meter checkers, as well as our city inspectors. Just to kind of give you another look at what that means is we've saved 11,542 metric CO2 from these improvements. Within our library, 50% of these libraries have implemented motion light sensors. They've relamped all of their buildings. And then, of course, Franklin Avenue Library, which opened last fall, is a platinum LEED renovation, and it operates 53% more efficient than similar-sized buildings. One of the things they've been working on in the last year is partnering with Mid-American Energy to create these audits to take a look at other areas where they could make improvements. And they found some of those, and they plan on implementing those down the road. Our fire department has also started to make some of these improvements. Of course, the new fire administration building, which ribbon cutting was last month, I believe, is expected to be LEED Gold. And then the new Fire Station 1 is expected to be a minimum of LEED certified. And something that I didn't know, which is always kind of fun to see, is that at Station 8, they're actually using solar assist for hot water heating within their building. One of the other goal areas that staff was asked to take a look at was to promote sustainability practices and economic development as appropriate to the project sponsor. Here's kind of a quick list of different projects that have come up, and these represent anything from brand new LEED certified construction, adaptive reuse, historic renovation, looking at redeveloping brownfields, and of course Yonkers is at the bottom there with the adaptive reuse of a historic building, which is kind of two stones there. And then finally in May, Council reviewed and adopted the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code. I'm just going to hover on this briefly. In 2011, staff completed our sustainability report, which kind of gives a comprehensive look at what has been accomplished over the course of the last 5 years for sustainability. I'll just ask Councilmember Coleman to pass those around so each of you have a copy. This is a little more comprehensive than what we can talk about here today, but I wanted to make sure you knew that was out there and it's available online. So then finally, here are some other areas of merit that I think are important for us to recognize. The Tomorrow Plan, as many of you have been involved in, has been at the forefront of a lot of what our staff has been looking at, and this has been over 650 hours of staff time, and that plan's getting ready to wrap up and move forward. The Parks Department is increasing their native species plantings and low-mow cycles. Green infrastructure solutions are moving forward at Easter Lake, and this is partially in part to the Polk County Water and Land Legacy Bond funding. And then, of course, the launch of the nonprofit Tree Des Moines, which Public Works was involved in initiating that. Some of our future plans is to move forward with STAR and the benchmarking and checking progress. This is, again, resource intensive. One of the things that we plan on doing is really building relationships across the city with local organizations for assistance. A lot of times, some of the areas that STAR looks at asks that we make improvements to things that we don't really control, but there are other organizations that do those things better, and it's about leveraging the relationships we have with them to push those objectives forward. And we also want to evaluate where we're at the end of 2013 to make sure that this is a program that's right for Des Moines and that makes sense for us to move forward with. The Drake Law Program partnership, for the last couple of years, the Drake Law School's staff has been working with the city and with the Greater Des Moines Partnership on different sustainability policies. And of course, we have representation from the partnership and from Drake here this morning. But what we want to do is continue to build those existing relationships and work on policy items related to the STAR framework, and then evaluate adoptions of recommendations that have come forward in the past. And then finally, the greenhouse gas baseline study. This RFP will be issued in January, and it will be completed. The study will be completed in January. And this actually gives us the opportunity to partner with other organizations if council thinks this is a direction we'd want to go. As an example, Drake is interested in the ability of maybe combining an RFP and doing something jointly. So that's something that we can review if you'd like. Other future plans, of course, the Municipal Service Center design. We want to make sure that we're integrating sustainability principles into that project. Continued work on green infrastructure projects, so evaluation of site locations for appropriate use of green infrastructure design. Of course, the 6th Avenue streetscape, which is part of the Greening America's Capital study, and the Conservation Fund charrette that'll be this summer. And then finally, building on our organizational capacity for sustainability in 2013. What staff would like to do is push this forward and really identify key staff people to build talents and skills with relation to sustainability principles. And then finally, they want to further integrate these concepts within the organization. I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Very good.
Anybody have any questions? Yep.
I did a little bit of research, and back in '07, the council unanimously passed Green Initiative, Sustainability Initiative, and I went through it, and I think we're moving towards that direction, albeit slowly. I think that we ought to challenge our green group with a few things like updating the glossary. There's a lot of terms missing in there, I think, that we should all be working towards. But Rick, I think that we've had some missed opportunities recently, and we need to strive to, one that I think about is the parking lot at the Bright Grandview Clubhouse is not a green parking lot, and it should have been. And when you say green parking lot or green alley, or people get this idea of what they are, and Laura probably understands this, I know the mayor understands it, that green parking lots take many different forms, and I think that parking lot could have been a lot greener than it is, and it should have been. However, I applaud you and the entire group on this, and Rick, I would encourage you to continue sending people to Shepherdstown. It's very intensive training, and I think it's going to be necessary. And I'd like to see some of our decision makers sent to Shepherdstown to bring them on board with the green initiatives.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Moore, council members, I appreciate those comments on the first one on the green parking lot. We are beginning a process internally to look for some places to do a pilot for that. It's a great idea. I agree with you. I think if we had a little more foresight, maybe we could have done this at the Grandview Clubhouse project that you mentioned. But that opportunity has passed us. But I think there are other locations that will come up where we can try to do that, and we're working on that at present. On the Shepherdstown project, I agree with you. I think that's great training. We've had 8 staff people go to that. The major thrust we're doing right now is to set up this sort of charrette or seminar here in the city, which would allow us to get about 60 people through, I think was the number that you had, Laura. They would actually come here and do the training. One of the advantages of that, not only can we do more people, it's more cost effective that way, but the real opportunity is to use that visit and the seminar to focus on a specific project here. So I think that's particularly beneficial. My own preference is to look at that kind of an initiative over additional trips to Shepherdstown, but I understand your point. We've talked about that before, Skip, and to the extent we can find additional opportunities to do that, we will.
Can we have a little cost analysis of the 2 options of sending people there, and how many people could participate, what the cost is?
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, we can.
I'm certain you'll miss a little bit of, the experience, but is it better to get it to the actual training to a whole lot of our employees?
Yeah.
And maybe to find out if there's interest from other cities in participating with an Iowa. Des Moines.
Yeah, Mr. Coleman, I think that's right and appropriate. We can do that kind of analysis, but let's keep in mind the overall goal here is to get the notion of green infrastructure built into the organization, and I think that's really what Skip is saying. I completely agree. I think what we want to do is build that skill set, that knowledge base into the organization so we can apply it to the many opportunities that we have as a city. So the question is, what's the best way to do that? And, the seminar idea, I think, is a great one. We're pursuing that. A little bit of the answer on this, I think, really depends on the curriculum that's actually established and the quality of the instruction that comes here and the way the program is organized. So I want to look at that in a little bit more detail. And then we can do, as you suggested, look at some cost comparisons between that versus sending folks there. And maybe at the end of the day, there's benefits from both that we need to look at. So we'll do that. But I think the goal is to build this, as Laura said, this institutional knowledge into the organization. That's what we're going to try to do. And there are different avenues to get there. We'll pursue all those things.
Any other questions? Good comments. Thank you, Laura. I think, Mr. Manager and the Green team, I think the point here is to move forward as quickly as possible. And now that we've got sort of a direction to go and some goals, and especially with the Star Communities, Laura, we really have a roadmap to achieve some of the goals that we want to attain, and probably should have been looking at over the last 4 or 5 years since that 2007 report that Skip was referring to. So I applaud you for moving forward, but let's do it a little more quickly than we've done up to this point.
Mr. Mayor, just one other comment. You might notice on the front page of the presentation that Laura Graham is identified as our sustainability coordinator. That is a bit of a new handle for her, as they say. That assignment has sort of informally been hers, and she's shared it with others within my office. But we've made this decision that Laura is going to be the sort of the point person to coordinate this effort within the city. As you can see from this presentation, she is well versed in it, and I think will do a great job in addressing the issue that the mayor just talked about, which is looking for ways to move this thing forward. So we're looking forward to that, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's move forward to the SSMID report.
Okay, good morning, Mayor, council members. Scott Sanders, Finance Director. So this morning on our agenda we have a topic with the self-supporting municipal improvement districts. These are the SMIDs that are throughout the city, and they are playing a more important role in maintaining public right-of-ways. So we saw it also as important to bring to you more detail as to how those are operating, both on the financial sense and the responsibilities that they have within their individual SMID districts. In the past, we have, in Finance Department, put together annual reports for each of the individual SMIDs, put those online on the city's webpage, and provided those to the different leadership of each of the SMIDs so that they had an annual document that would review their finances. But again, with the importance of these districts, we decided that it would be nice to have one aggregate data or information, if you will. And so I've also provided each of you a small booklet that provides additional information with each district as well as in aggregate. So this presentation is really a summary of the booklet that you have in front of you. The intent is to put that booklet on the website later today, now that you've seen it. Update that annually as well, as there are changes in the works, including tonight's council meeting with one of the SMID districts. And then also, part of this discussion this morning is to really formalize what needs to occur with the SMIDs as far as the timing of their budget submittal, because in the end, it is the city council that approves SMID budgets along with our total city budget at the end of February each year. So we wanted to also formalize that process. I'm giving you some photos of the existing SMID districts. So each district operates separately, and accounting needs to keep those funds separate. They each have a separate tax rate and obviously a geographic boundary that generates tax revenues. Those are being used for different purposes depending on which SMID district you're looking at. But the idea is the same, is that these areas have asked for an enhanced amount of service. And so they are paying for that with their local taxes through the SMID mechanism. The four districts that are in existence today are the Sherman Hill, Highland Park, Ingersoll, and then the downtown. Again, any surpluses that may occur at the end of a fiscal year within these districts stays within those individual districts. So there is no commingling of funds at all between these different districts. However, the transactions do occur differently depending on which SMID district we're talking about. Sherman Hill, for instance, this illustrates, pays their own bills and then asks for reimbursement from the city. And so we do have an account, if you will, for Sherman Hills waiting for a reimbursement request from their district. And then we'll make those payments to them as the paperwork comes through. Highland Park is processed entirely through the city's fund. Again, this is a separate Highland Park fund, but it's our staff that are processing those payments. Ingersoll has a little bit of a mix in that there are certain responsibilities that the city takes care of, and then they have an opportunity to ask for reimbursement from some of the activities that they have arrangements with. Downtown SMID is different in that as we receive revenue, we simply pay that out to them on a monthly basis. And so the accounting of the downtown SMID is entirely on their books, if you will. And we have an arrangement such that as the revenue comes in, we pay that to the downtown SMID.
Scott, on those four different SMIDs, Sherman Hill, the Sherman Hill Neighborhood Association Board would be the governing body of that SMID. Highland Park, do they have a board? They do have a board? Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is that they do.
And I know Ingersoll will, and then downtown does.
Right, and
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so each of these districts, we wanted to provide more information. And again, the booklet in front of you goes deeper yet into the detail behind each one of these. Sherman Hill actually has two districts dealing with the lighting, the more decorative lighting in the area and the cost of maintaining that. And so these were established back in '97. There are expiration dates for each one of these districts with the option to continue on and on, if you will. There's no limitation, as I understand it. The revenues for this district are mostly coming from the property taxes. You'll see in the next couple slides, that's about $40,000 a year. There is a replacement credit because they are using their funds to pay for the street lighting, whereas if they were not in existence, if the Sherman Hills SMID district was not in existence, the city would incur about $6,500 a year in cost in lighting that area. So we do give them credit for that, and there's a small payment of about $6,500 a year to the SMID district. And then separately, they do have a tax-exempt Hoyt Sherman place there that's generous and pays a pilot fee. I think that's only about $700 a year, but very appropriate. The expenses again go to the everything dealing with the lighting, as far as the bulb replacements, keeping things clean and replaced if damaged. There's also some small insurance policies as well. The actual finances are combined here. So you've got the two district revenues running between $40,000 and $50,000 a year, and then the total expenses are less than that. So they are running a surplus on an annual basis. And Community Development Department, I want to thank them because they're very helpful in pulling this together. It's important to understand that with these SMID districts, there's three elements, as you might expect. There's the communication with the governing bodies that they have established, as well as the desires of those neighborhoods. And community development takes on that role. There's a couple individuals over there, and so they helped out with these reports each year. And then, of course, legal is involved in making sure we're doing everything in the proper way, in the legal way. And then finance, as far as the operations of the funds, whatever transfers are necessary. So all three departments are heavily involved when it comes to the SMIDs.
Scott, when there's a surplus, do we ever refund that, or are they allowed to use that for anything else, or is it very specific where that money goes?
The money stays in their account for their purposes that have been spelled out. And so they are restricted on how they can use that. And so part of the discussion that my understanding through CD is going on is how much is a more appropriate surplus or fund balance to maintain, because there is a useful life of the lights, and they can be costly to replace. And so those discussions are underway, especially with Sherman Hill. This will be the largest balance of the SMIDs.
Well, evidently, if there's a surplus, we're adjusting the annual rate. It shows here that 2013 is a 150 when it could be 250.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've left it, you'll see, at the 150. So there hasn't been any adjustments recently to that rate, but that would be an option that could be undertaken.
But you take it back to their board and make the proposal if you think that's necessary.
Well, and that's part of this discussion is if that can happen. My understanding is that is not in the past. They're well aware of the surplus being available. If you'd like, we could get into that discussion more with them and make those recommendations. At this point, we've pretty much let them make the suggestion to keep the rate the same, and then we've done that.
Scott, but doesn't the document that's actually signed by the property owners and presented for council action, it actually stipulates in there, because I know dealing with Ingersoll tonight, what the rate will be by year. And is it our responsibility as part of the budget and the council that it should automatically change to whatever's stipulated? And have we missed that on some of the SMIDs?
Well, understand there are two separate processes, and I may need to call upon CD, but my understanding is that the documents indicate a maximum.
Correct.
And more recently, an intent on the Ingersoll on where to get started, but I'm not aware of any commitment that the rate will move at a certain pace. We're anticipating an annual discussion as to what the rate will need to be.
See, I'm going back to Ingersoll, the existing SMID, where they said it was going to be, start out at 175, or start out at 225, whatever it was, and,
Right.
and then go to 3 this year, and it didn't. I just want to make sure that I understand. Is that something that you're saying the board has to actually take action on, or is it something that will automatically happen during the budget process?
No, I think we want the board to be making recommendations on that to the council.
Okay.
Because the only automatic would be that it would remain the same.
Okay.
Well, and I'm going to ask City Manager to make comment. As you see, Christine, the document here, that Sherman Hill had the option to go all the way to 350. I think they're maintaining 150 at the moment, and they're having revenues now that are exceeding expenses and have for a
Right.
considerable period of time. So I think it's the board that's going to make a recommendation is to review their expense lines. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I think you said it right. From my view, from a policy perspective, there are two overarching issues that are important here. One is that to be successful, the SMID districts really need to have a board, and the board needs to engage the property owners, and they need to come to grips with how much they want to tax themselves over and above the normal rate to support these kinds of things. So every one of these districts, we've always been careful to make sure that there is a board and they're active with their owners and they're sort of reviewing these numbers. The second thing, though, all of that said, is that this is fundamentally a tax. And that means at the end of the day, the buck stops here. It's really the council ultimately that approves budgets and sets the rates. And so you have that sort of policy role in this whole thing to make sure that it stays together. But again, the policy has been to make sure that the property owners in the district do play a major role in terms of setting the rates. But again, the buck stops here. You retain the ultimate right to set budgets and set rates.
With a recommendation from these boards or foundations or whoever
Yes,
it is that's doing
yes.
it.
But sometimes my fear is that the process looks so much like it's coming from the neighborhood that I fear that sometimes the council feels like, well, this is you just have to do what they say, and that's not exactly true. I think you do retain discretion in terms of what the rates are and how the budgets are established and so forth. And the law is set up that way, and so you just need to understand that's a responsibility that you have.
Yeah, we do have that responsibility, but we still listen to their board because they have projects coming forward periodically, and that's why I think they like to have a reserve so they can add to some of the things they like to do in their neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to Highland Park, there's a new element to this one as well with the signage in addition to lighting. Established in 2003. This one goes out a little further at this point, but again can be extended another 5 years as necessary. About $12,000 a year in property taxes. Again, because there is a lighting element to this SMID, there is a replacement credit. This one's much smaller than the Sherman Hills. I think it's about $1,800 a year. And then again, the expenses are focused on the street lighting, a little bit of insurance, utilities, and even some plant replacements as well. The finances over the last few years indicating that it's also strong, dealing with about a $40,000 to $50,000 fund balance. Again, the expense of replacing some of those lighting, that may be an appropriate amount of fund balance to withhold, especially with some signage that they're responsible for as well.
Scott, is the annual plant material and maintenance contract, is that done by the city, or do they contract out? Do you know?
That one has changed in the past. I understand it to be contracted now. They had done some of that work themselves early on, but now it's being contracted.
With an independent third party and not the city?
With a vendor, my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so that rate's at $1.75. Again, the maximum could be higher than that, but they've not asked for that change at this point.
And looking at Highland Park, they're anticipating more streetscape down Euclid there to the between 6th and 2nd Avenue, so.
Excellent.
So Ingersoll, which I think we all understand is undergoing some changes to include Grand Avenue, expanding the boundaries and the rate change. But this report is, again, the one in front of you is based on June of 2012. So we kept the original Ingersoll name, established in 2007. And again, the Ingersoll Grand will replace this SMID district. This has more of the streetscape elements, with the sidewalks, curbs, crosswalks, and some additional landscaping as part of the responsibility of the SMID. Running a little over $20,000 a year in revenue. The expenses have been higher than that, so there has been some additional city expense on this one that will, starting in 2014, get corrected, if you will, with the new Ingersoll Grand. There will be sufficient revenues, and these comments you'll see below, to pay for the entire $75,000 a year in enhanced services that are being provided in that area. And in fact, there'll be sufficient revenues with the new boundaries and new rate for the SMID to do other activities that they've proposed to you. So this one is undergoing a rather significant change. And I think to Councilmember Hensley's point, the current year, 2013, did have an opportunity to go to 225. And so there was some confusion as to whether that was automatic. It is, none of these maximum rates are automatic. It needs to come through a request mechanism. So we've kind of made that clear with all the SMID districts as well. Again, this is an opportunity to formalize this whole process more and get them in here talking to us in October as opposed to December or any points later than that. Any questions on the Ingersoll? So let me move on to the largest.
Can I ask this one question? Absolutely. In terms of, I'm looking at the valuations here. What's the area valuation? Is that changing moving forward to include Grand? Because I notice yes, that valuations are.
Yeah, this valuation here, Mayor, is just for the pilot project between 28th and 31st on Ingersoll. So it's going to be significantly larger. A lot more of Ingersoll and including Grand.
Such that
for the discussion on TIF uses, it's interesting to note here that in spite of the fact that we've had some additions, buildings, and improvements, the assessments have gone down.
On the with the new one?
Well, take a look. Look at the valuations.
The old pilot district.
In the
pilot district.
And that's not uncommon that we've seen.
I understand, but it also we have to be careful of on another subject, the whole TIF thing, because it looks like the increment is not available.
It's very true, and there is no TIF request for fiscal year 2014 coming from the new Ingersoll Grand. That'll be something that'll be addressed in the 2015 budget, right, 2 years from now. Recognition that there was not much growth in the area to capture within a TIF. So the downtown was established in '98. At this point, due to expire in 2014, again, the anticipation is that there'll be renewals. The enhanced maintenance includes a lot of the public spaces that you would see downtown. It includes beyond that some of the business attraction and retention activities that they go through. Again, this is from a processing standpoint, this is a situation where they have not only established board, but they have staff and quite a few different operations with other revenue sources as well. So it's a much bigger organization. We simply take the revenues that are brought in and transfer those to them monthly, with oversight, obviously, on where those are being expended. They're still subject to bidding rules and things of that nature as well, so there is that oversight as well. The finances of the downtown SMID, obviously much larger, dealing with a little over $1 million a year. As a side note, you'll see it, the bottom table there, the county auditor's office determined that they needed to treat SMIDs and TIF districts differently with the 2013 fiscal year, in that if they overlap, the TIF needs to capture the revenues that the SMID generates for the valuation that the TIF uses, and then the TIF needs to use a grant to the SMID. So that $597,000 you see labeled there as a grant is the what historically would have been SMID tax revenues deposited right into the downtown SMID, but now it's actually TIF revenues that then are granted to the SMID. So unfortunately, there is one extra step that's been inserted for that, and we will see that to a much smaller degree with the Sherman Hills SMID in the near future as well. Not even 100,000, just a little bit of money. So moving forward, you'll see this mix. It just happens to be about 50% of their funds would come directly from SMID revenues, and the other half through the TIF because of the higher SMID rate. So this one's undergoing some changes as well. The request for 2014 is to increase the rate to 115. The additional revenue would be about 173,000. The city continues to contribute no more than 250,000 to the SMID. Again, it's kind of like the in-kind or the savings that the city receives because they are handling some of the services the city would otherwise need to undertake. There was some more detail, I believe, provided recently on their 2014 budget. We've provided kind of a summary view of that off to the right. It's essentially the same numbers, however, just summarized a little more. And that would be our first annual summary of the SMIDs. Again, we would intend to do this exercise every year, preferably in October as opposed to December, so that we can get these out of the way fairly soon in the budget process.
That's great information. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're very appreciative of legal and CD assisting finance in producing these documents. And again, this will be online that we can refer to citizens as well.
Okay. One last question. Now, what is the timeline once the SMID is actually established, that governing group, their budget then starts July 1st? Is that typical? So it coincides with our fiscal year end?
That's correct.
And so the revenues are available at that point?
That's correct.
Okay.
So if the city were to have established a new SMID, my understanding, and this is a nuance that we didn't understand maybe before, is that the county would like to have that information in October so that they can look at the boundaries and make sure that whatever the boundaries are of any new SMID or any additions are not cutting through parcel lines that they have. So they have time between October, November, and December to change whatever taxing parcel information they have on their site. It's just an administrative function that can be very laborious at the county. So they ask that any changes to boundaries occur in October, if not sooner, so that they can get those established in time for all the budgets that occur in January and February when we approve our budget.
So Scott, just to be clear, the SMID budgets for each one of these districts actually ends up showing up in your budget that the council approves. So it's part of the city council budget.
Is it part of the community development piece of the budget? I mean, because I don't recall, to be perfectly honest, seeing actual
Where the line item
SMIDs.
is.
Special revenue budgets,
It'd be
because
special
these funds
revenue?
have to be kept separate from our own general funds.
Okay.
So they are a separate budget,
Excellent.
if you will. And we can highlight that more for you now moving forward as well as where that shows up in the budgets. But there's a certified tax rate that the city has for our own purposes, the 810 rate, our debt service rate, and on that certification of taxes, the individual rates for each of the SMID districts is also certified.
Okay.
And that's where I typically point people to say, okay, look, you're the 5th SMID on this list, and they can see their tax rates.
Great.
This little handout that you've put together, Scott, is really terrific and can hang on.
Yeah.
That gives you
That's
good
great.
baseline data.
Anybody have anything else? Ellie, Skip, Bob? All right, thank you a lot, Scott. Let's move forward with the budget update. Is this your responsibility also, Scott?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next topic, Mayor, council members, is the 2014 budget process. We want to get started. Actually, we've already started, obviously, on this, but we wanted to fill you in on what the timeline is looking like. This morning, I've discussed with you the SMID overview. On January 14th is the next scheduled council meeting and workshop. We'd like to start right out with the general operating budget so that we can discuss the fact that all the major revenue and expenditures that we've looked at indicate that the 2014 budget is looking balanced. Recalling that a year ago, the council took action to resolve both fiscal year 13 that we're in now, as well as 2014. The $7.2 million deficit, if you will, has been resolved with the budget cuts that were approved last year, as well as the tax rate increase that was put in place. And so we need to kind of review that with you in more detail. We'll do that at a workshop setting on January 14th. Again, there's no indication, any need for change in rates for 2014 or additional cuts. It appears that we're right on track for both fiscal year 13 that we're in now, and I'll give you the numbers to that on the 14th, as well as the fiscal year 14. The property valuations recovered in 14 like we had anticipated. So we hit bottom, if you will, on our valuations in 2013 that we're in now, and we actually recover back to what fiscal year 12 looked like for the 14 numbers. So we took a dip in the values and came back up as anticipated for 14. And so we'll provide you a list of all the major revenue items as well as the major expense items on the 14th, and show you that we will have a balanced budget for 14. Then what we have are discussions that are necessary on the capital improvement plan. That goes hand in hand with our debt service fund. The debt service fund is anticipated to be in better shape, if you will, for 14. That again was anticipated. And so the tax rate on the debt service fund will go down in anticipation of the need for the pension fund rates to go up. Again, that was anticipated a year ago as well. So you'll see some underlying rates change, but again, we're right on course to have a balanced budget with the total tax rate remaining the same for fiscal year 14. We'll get through the capital improvement plan and move on in February to the enterprise funds. There are 4 of those with the sanitary, the storm, parking, and solid waste. There are multi-year rate adjustments for both the sanitary and the storm, excuse me, that we're in the middle of. The sanitary is, I believe, a 4-year, and the storm, I'd have to double check, I think is a 3-year remaining rate increases. So there is no additional need for action on any of the utility rates as well. So this is really working according to plan in that in a 2-year budget, the pain, if you will, is felt up front, and in the second year, in this case 2014, it's pretty much a status quo from personnel, staffing, and from major revenue items, including property taxes. The parking with the refundings that occurred, that's in good standing for this year and next. However, as you are probably all well aware, that continues to struggle, so there will probably be discussions about 2015 on how to deal with parking. But we're in good standing this year and next. No need for changes at that level as well. And then solid waste is in good standing as well, so no changes there. So we can hit those topics all on February 11th at a workshop setting, and then and have the documents to you shortly thereafter, so that we can have a February 25th adoption of the city's budget. The requirement is March 15th, so we do have the first meeting in March kind of hold in reserve if there are any surprises that may need to be addressed. So again, we're right on course. There have been, admittedly, and you'll see this in the detail, some major shifts, but in revenues and expenses, but they've equaled out nicely. So we can share those details with you on the next council meeting or workshop.
Scott, speaking of parking, have you heard anything new on the audit of the park and ride, where that stands?
Catching me. I was on vacation last week, and on Friday I did receive an email.
Excuse.
Yeah. It's a once every 5 year thing. And so I did receive an email on Friday that asked for more detail on the park and ride. Unfortunately, put this. The individual we've been dealing with the FTA has no accounting background.
Oh.
And so he has asked if it's okay to bring in some of his finance and accounting people to look over his work and potentially ask more questions. And I think that's totally legitimate.
Yeah.
And actually, it made us feel more comfortable that we didn't have to explain things like interest earnings to an individual.
I would think that would make it much easier to get through this.
Well, but unfortunately, we've lost time. I'm not very happy about that, because if we'd been dealing with finance people from the start, we probably could have gotten this knocked out months ago.
3 months ago, 4 months ago.
So that's the update there. There will be more discussion, but I can't tell you where that will lead until I've sat down with them.
Rick, I received a lot of positive feedback on our town hall meetings on the budget a year ago. I think that the public, for the most part, was very receptive to that, but I'm starting to hear that they feel like we should, since we're on a 2-year balanced budget, we should at least have an update somewhere before this moves on. And they do voice their concerns about the morning workshops. Most of them can't make it to morning workshop, and I was wondering if we could schedule something between the 11th and the 25th, probably in this chambers right here, and give the public an update on where we're at with the budget, so that they've got an opportunity to give us input.
Mr. Moore, we could schedule something here to receive general public input. I don't know that it would be a town hall kind of arrangement, but we could. Maybe in conjunction with, you could shift a time of a workshop and do it in the evening if you thought that was more convenient for people.
Well, generally our workshops are the morning of the council meeting.
We could do that. Do you have particular thoughts as to time of day for it that you think would be better?
I think about the same time we held the town hall meetings last year. I didn't hear any.
6 o'clock?
Yeah, I didn't hear any complaints about the timing of those at all. Just an idea.
We can do that. I think the one thing that I want to stress with everybody is that we are in the second year of a 2-year balanced budget. All of our numbers look pretty good, as Scott just said. In my view, there's not going to be the need to make major adjustments to either to reduce expenses or increase tax rate. That's what Scott said. I agree with that assessment. That's not to say the council doesn't have the ability to make changes in the budget. You do. You can do that. But I want to be careful, at least from my standpoint, not to raise the specter of some sort of additional financial challenges that we've got, because we simply can't make that case. So I don't want to create that feeling out there in the community. All of that said, you do need to take formal action on a budget, and you can always make adjustments in that if you want to. But from my standpoint, I want to be careful not. We did a lot of heavy lifting last year. I don't want to put the organization or the community through another very difficult session thinking we have to make major adjustments when we don't have to.
Skip, do you think, because I had the same reaction from people, and I think people, and I don't want to say it's half the people live in town, but there's some people that really feel like insiders to what we do. They care a lot about it. They're the spokespeople at neighborhood meetings, and in their cafeteria at work. You know, they like to know what's going on. I mean, do you think there's, do you think it works to kind of exploit our public hearing and, you know, set it within one of our meetings and announce it to neighborhood people that Scott and the team are making the same kind of presentation they'd make somewhere else, but combine it with our real public hearing that we're going to have anyway on it? Or do you think it's a different?
Well, I think the issue will come down to what else is on the agenda that night of a council meeting. If there are some other hot topics on there, you know, this room could be packed and there's people out in the hall, and
But the question I guess I would have, you anticipate we would do this on the same night as council meeting?
No.
Okay, so.
No. I'm thinking that we have a responsibility, and I'm hearing this from the residents of Des Moines, that they would just like to have a report back to them as to where we're at, because it's in the middle of a 2-year balanced budget. And I think we owe them that responsibility. I wouldn't anticipate any changes at all, but I think it's.
What you're saying is just give them a report out, and then if they have any comments, gives them an opportunity to have some input. That's what we've advocated for quite a period of time, so I think it's a good idea.
And if we could work with you on understanding how far into the process, you know, how finalized the numbers would need to be, and so then where it could fit into the schedule. You're probably instinctively right that between the February 11th and 25th would probably work the best. We'd want to be far enough along that we had actual numbers already input in the system, and therefore reports we could provide.
And I think in some ways people just want to make sure that we did what we said we were going to do, you know, the changes in departments, and, you know, you could probably list the 6 or 8 largest things that we said we were going to do, and, you know, show people there's some. I actually view it as a time to really brag up what we've been doing and give our citizens some really good news rather than lighting a fire. And
actually, and on that note, we have prepared, and it's a near final draft of all the budgetary items that were agreed upon, and any cuts and revenue adjustments, and where we stand in that implementation. And so we were planning to provide that to you in the next week, the next few days, so that you had that as well. So that would be a document we could share with the public as well.
There's one other piece as we certify our budget. I think that we all have some discomfort over is we certify our budget March 15th, and we have a body of folks that's still in session up on the Hill that have hit us in the past after we've certified our budget, and then it puts us in a little different situation because we can't raise taxes at that point. It requires cuts to make sure our budget is balanced. So hopefully we can get our certification more in sync with their adjournment, I would hope, at some point in the future.
Well, state law requires certification by the 15th of March, so you don't, unfortunately, have the luxury to delay it until they adjourn.
No, but I think that what we ought to address that we've talked about in the past is how they handle their input as it impacts other people's budgets, that there should be some point at which when they adjourn, we do. Now the schools, when do they certify?
April 15th, I believe.
So they have another month, which actually gives them a little more breathing room. But one would think that city budgets could be on the same schedule or a more similar schedule to the schools. I don't see a reason why there should be a difference, and maybe we could lobby for that kind of a change in state law, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I think you're making a really excellent point. Either do that, or it gives you one heck of a strong point in your lobbying efforts.
Exactly.
To say, look, if you make these changes such that they impact our upcoming budget, you're really, I mean, it's just a quite irresponsible thing to do, in my view, if they do that sort of thing. So hopefully they wouldn't, whatever they do. They would have a year lag on it.
All right, anybody have anything else for Scott? And seeing none, let's quickly open it up. Anybody in the audience would like to make a comment or ask a question or observation or need a clarification? Marty, I see you sitting out there leaning on the other chair. Nothing today? Oh. All right, seeing none, let's adjourn this meeting.